in Washington after at least one gunman opened fire early this morning, killing several people. We just heard from the public information officer from the base in question, the one you're looking at on your screen. There are reports of multiple people wounded, reports of fatalities as well. We're working on the numbers. As you see, Greg, another picture on the screen there, but yet another helicopter coming into the area. We've been watching this all morning, and we're glad to have you with us. I'm Jenna Lee.
And I'm Greg Jarrett in for John Scott. The alleged shooter apparently barricading himself into a building there. Initial reports saying the alleged shooter is a 6-foot-tall, bald black male carrying what witnesses say is a long arm, a rifle. He is contained, which means apparently that he's pinned down, he's cornered, and is reportedly injured, but he is not in custody. 3,000 people work the heavily guarded facility. Choppers there swooping, as you've been watching all morning long, to airlift people to safety. We should mention that weapons are not generally allowed on these military bases. NCIS and DC Metro Police cordoning off that area to try to secure the scene as ambulances retrieve the victims. Peter Ducey, live at the scene. And Peter, you know, you've been doing extraordinary reporting all morning long. It's top of the hour right now, so set the scene for us once again.
Well, I'll tell you, Greg, since we first arrived about 2 hours ago, the weather has gotten a lot worse. But in the last 1 hour, we've seen multiple, some kind of a helicopter either rescue or assist, where U.S. Park Police helicopters are coming in, flying over homes and over businesses just 15, 20 yards above the top buildings, and they're looping right around, and they are dropping baskets. We've seen 2 people, at least, law enforcement officers dropped down. They had weapons, and then those baskets would come on up, and they were empty. So we are led to believe, based on what we've seen with our own eyes, about 200 yards away from the scene, that law enforcement has been put in somewhere on the roof. Right now, we've got helicopters crisscrossing the sky. We are as close as we can get, but we have heard now from some witnesses to what happened this morning. So let's listen right now to someone who is a little bit closer than we are.
Walked up at the corner here about New Jersey and them, and I saw a victim laying on the ground. I was told by a young lady who was handing out newspapers here that he was dropped off by a vehicle, and then I saw a bunch of good citizens trying to revive him and save him.
You think he was from the Navy Yard?
Most definitely. It's going on, coinciding with all of the commotion and everything, right around 8:20, 8:30.
Okay, and then I guess he must have got out and they just brought him down here.
He was just laying here with one person for a good few minutes. One lady seemed pretty desperate. She had on like a turquoise or dark purple shirt, and then a bunch of victims came up trying to revive him.
Do you think he was been shot?
I believe so.
Now, Greg, the most compelling thing that I've heard from from as close as I've been able to get, was almost 2 hours ago over a police radio from an officer that was standing within about 5 feet from where I was. A very frantic call went out for an officer down inside that building on the 3rd floor. We were then moved much further back. Things have become very chaotic and very loud, as you can see, with these helicopters making their turn just right on top of us, right here at the corner of 7th and L in Washington, D.C. And then, Greg, just about a half an hour ago, a D.C. Metro Police truck showed up, and they started blasting a PA announcement over that 8 or 9 foot tall brick wall to the people inside, an order to shelter in place. Everybody inside, shelter in place until an all clear is given. And so far, we have not heard that all clear given. And trust me, we would, based on where we're standing, because that announcement was very loud. The whole idea was for everyone inside buildings hiding out right now to hear it. So they told everybody still, just as recently as 25 minutes to a half an hour ago, to stay put, shelter in place until there's an all clear. And as of right now, Greg, no all clear.
You know, is it your sense that there is simply one gunman, or could there be multiple gunmen? And I certainly recognize that they always assume there's more than one, and they search for others. But have you received any word on that?
Greg, the officers here on scene, at least the ones that we've been able to get in touch with, are very tight-lipped. But I can tell you that throughout the day, and even as recently, even as I'm speaking right now, marked and unmarked law enforcement vehicles with their sirens on, with the lights on, are just zooming toward the scene. They're trying to get there as fast as possible. And while some of the shots of officers who are in a protected place, kind of right up near the gate, right up near the brick wall, are not necessarily frantic to look at them, 1 block away, they are moving officers and people as fast as they can, probably driving too fast for a normal Monday. But again, this is not a normal Monday. There's an active shooter situation, and whatever is going on, whatever the status is of that shooter, we've heard reports that he is subdued, but we don't know. What we do know is that outside, 1 block off, and as you can see, officers are in a hurry to get as close as they.
I believe we might have lost Peter there. You saw the shot breaking up just a little bit. What we're waiting on, and part of what you're seeing there on your screen, is a news conference from what we believe is to be the local police. We're waiting to hear exactly who's going to be speaking to us, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more information. But if you're just joining us, just waking up here on the West Coast, for example, here's what we woke up to this morning together. There has been a shooting at a Navy Yard that is the home of 3,000 people. I should say home. This is where they work every day, and we understand most arrive at work between 6 and 9 o'clock in the morning. And this shooting occurred around 8:20 or so. So now we're several hours later, and we've learned, quite frankly, some that's significant, Greg, but also very little at the same time. We know that there are several people injured. We know that there are some fatalities. We do not know the nature of the injuries. We do not know the motivation of the shooter. So we're working on some of these unanswered questions as you watch this helicopter. And we've been watching this for about an hour now. The helicopter swooping in, lowering people to the roof. There's a look at the news conference we're going to go to in a moment. We have been able to confirm through our team here that at least 1 person was brought to GW Hospital. And the hospital would confirm that they were brought there, but would not confirm the extent of the injuries of that person. Guys, is that someone talking that we should listen to now, or are we waiting to go into the press conference? Okay, we're going to wait to go in just a moment.
You know,
Rod Wheeler is with us, former D.C. Metro homicide detective. Apparently, we're waiting on the audio there in the news conference, but Rod is with us. Rod, you've been able to speak to some folks on the ground. What are they telling you about the nature of the injuries? What do we know so far?
Morning apparently is when the first shots rang out. I actually spoke with somebody in our unified command center here in the DC area, and from what I'm being told, several calls came in, Jenna, for a man with a gun, and then we got a call, or the police got a call, that there had been several people shot. Now, when the first officers arrived, now Navy police was already on the scene, but then DC police arrived. The officers actually responded from our 1st District substation, Jenna, which the viewers should know is only about a half block away from the Navy Yard. So when they arrived, the first thing they tried to do was contain the situation and to try to evacuate people out. And that's, of course, why we see the helicopter there, just making sure there's nobody else that need to be evacuated and making sure that there's no other victims. Now, the police department and the fire department set up a triage unit over at the Washington National Stadium, which is about a half-mile away, and they started taking victims there. The most severe victims, from what I'm being told right now, is that the most severe victims are over at GW Hospital, which makes a lot of sense because they are set up to handle mass casualties, and then they took other victims over to the Washington Hospital Center, and then a couple of victims over to the Dimensions Hospital, which is over in Southeast DC. So that's exactly what we know. One other thing very important, the police are saying right now that they don't know for sure if there's 1 shooter, possibly 2 shooters. What we do know, though, Jenna, is that several different types of rounds was used. Bullets was used against the victims. The hospitals are reporting that to the police department. So because of that, we have to err on the side of caution and assume that maybe, just maybe, there were more than 1 shooter. So that's what's going on now. They do have this individual or individuals contained in building 197. Our SWAT unit, which is called ERT here, is the Emergency Response Team. They're actually surrounding that building right now. They believe it's 1 shooter, possibly 2. but they don't think it's any more victims on that floor, but they haven't been up to the 3rd or 4th floor quite yet, Jenna.
And we don't really know exactly how many people are still left in that building, 197, the building in question.
Yeah, and
That's
Rob,
right.
let me bounce this off of you. John Scott, who is, always Johnny on the spot, has emailed us with some sources, and he says the following. The shooting apparently has occurred on the 3rd floor, building 197 of the NAVSEA systems. And if that's the case, the floor houses the program executive officer, the ship programs, and the ship engineering staffs. The head of the ship programs, typically a 1 or star admiral, comprised of several senior executive service civilians. So, Rod, what does that tell you, if anything?
Well, I'll tell you the first thing it tells me is that possibly, again, we're just speculating here, but this is experience speculation, that maybe this gunman, if there is only one gunman, specifically targeted an individual on that floor. Now, John is exactly right. I've been over there to the Navy Yard several times. Matter of fact, during my police days, that's where I was stationed in uniform, and I can tell you that it's very well protected. The Navy does a great job in protecting it, as well as the Marines. However, there are many entrances to that base. So, the question remains now, was this an individual that was associated with the Navy? We don't know that, or any branch of the military, or was just another individual off the street. We don't know that either. This is a very active and fluid situation. One other thing that I just learned is that Tyler Elementary School is an elementary school less than a block away from the Navy Yard. It is safe. All the children are safe. The Marines actually have that school surrounded right now. The school is on lockdown.
And we understand that there's actually 6 schools in the area on lockdown as a precaution here, Rod. And we see, again, a lot of different law enforcement at play here. Who would take the lead in this type of situation, Rod? And if indeed there is a shooter barricaded, as the reports have suggested, what is the plan? What is the strategy at this point?
Well, I can tell you, Jenna, that the D.C. Police Department, again, our ERT unit, which is our SWAT unit, they're taking command of the situation now. But we work in conjunction now with the JTTF, which is the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Anytime we have a situation that happens like this, on federal property or military property, we get several agencies involved. However, our ERT unit is on the scene right now. They are commanding this. Now, the FBI is on notice. They actually on the scene. As a matter of fact, when I came over here today, I passed by some of them. They're there. The U.S. Park Police and the Federal Protective Service. They're all right there. Just so the viewers know, the Navy base actually sits on Capitol Hill. So there's tons of police officers all around there, but it's a very heavily populated area as well.
Let
so
me
the
just jump
response
in.
was right away.
And you're right. Well said, Rod, that there certainly was a huge response initially, and that's one of the things that kicked off for the rest of us, that this was not a small situation. We just got some information into our newsroom. Apparently, the Navy is now taking the lead in this investigation, and according to an FBI source to Fox News, the FBI SWAT team is working with other agencies to now clear the building. We keep on seeing this helicopter kind of swoop around a little bit, Rod, and we've seen them in the past lowering the empty baskets to building rooftops. And there's been a big question about, are they evacuating folks that are injured? What exactly are they doing? And now they continue to circle. Why would they do that, especially given there could be an active shooter that is barricaded somewhere in one of those buildings?
Right, because it's always the possibility, Jenna, that an active shooter or any criminal can slip out from where he or she is being harbored or staying. So that's why they're hovering around the top of the building outside the helicopter units, making sure that no way this guy or persons can get out of that building, just in case the police on the ground do miss them. That's why we're seeing the helicopter hover around. The other thing is they want to make sure there's not another shooter, and that's very important because we don't know at this point whether or not there were 2 shooters. So just in case somebody else comes out of that building, they'll be able to spot them much faster with the helicopter being overhead, Jenna.
Rod, if they have him contained but not in custody, that suggests that he's pinned down, he's barricaded someplace. One hopes he does not have any hostages. But how do you approach that situation?
Well, we move closer and closer to the person that's the threat. And in this case, it would be the individual with the weapons. Now, if this guy, John, is on if this guy is on the 3rd or 4th floor, I can tell you that our SWAT unit, the FBI SWAT unit, they're a floor above and a floor below. And they're going to continue to work their way to this area where they believe this person is either hiding out or staging, some type of an attack. They have to be very careful, though, because they don't know if this person has explosive devices. And that's something else that we have to, really, really watch for in these types of situations. So they're going to move very closely. I can tell you that our bomb unit is on the scene just as a precaution. There hasn't been any mention of bombs, but just as a precaution, because you never know, Greg, in these situations, what all kinds of artillery this bad guy may have.
Do they utilize listening devices and mini cameras and so on and so forth to try to get a fix on the individual?
Yes, they do. We utilize all kinds of technology, but I can also tell you that they have several cameras on the property there at the Navy Yard. And I can rest assure you that they're reviewing a lot of that video from this morning just to try to decipher, who was the guy that was the assailant and who are the innocent people. They're doing that right now, Greg, as I speak.
Just backing up a little bit for our viewers, we're awaiting a news conference from local police, local law enforcement in the area. They were supposed to begin about 5 minutes ago. As you can tell, this is a quickly developing situation, and we're going to wait on some official word about the number of injured and the number killed, because we have reports that both are being careful with the numbers as it's prudent at this time. I'm sure for many of you, when you see scenes like this of an active shooting at a military base, you might think of Major Nidal Hassan, the shooting in Fort Hood. We have heard no comparisons to that point as far as terrorism, but whenever you see a shooting like this come up, there's a lot of questions about motive and what exactly is happening. Why here? Why now? Why the shooting? Those are the questions we're trying to answer today. In the meantime, it was supposed to be a rather usual, normal day at the White House. We were expecting to hear from the president as scheduled around 11:40 Eastern Time to talk a little bit about the economy. Ed Henry is there. He's our chief White House correspondent. Ed, things certainly have changed today. What are you hearing?
Jenna, they certainly have changed. At this moment, we're still expecting, though, the president to come out and talk about the economy and the 5-year anniversary of the financial crisis. But his schedule has been disrupted in the sense that White House officials say the president has now gotten multiple briefings this morning about this unfolding situation. Obviously, they're paying very close attention to it since it is a military facility, first of all. Second of all, this is only about 3 or 4 miles away from the White House, where all of this is taking place. We haven't seen some dramatic increase in security around here, but certainly folks here at the White House, the Secret Service, and others paying close attention to that situation. We're told that the president has talked to his deputy chief of staff, Alyssa Mastromonaco, about reaching out, talking to the FBI, other federal law enforcement agencies, helping to make sure the federal government is coordinating a response. We've been reaching out to the White House all morning. We're still waiting to hear back as to whether or not the president's event is still not just on time, but when and if that event moves forward later this hour, if he will start that event about the economy talking about this incident. I would suspect it's very likely, given the magnitude of it, that he would say something, Jen.
At this point, Eddie, it's on though, right? It's on at 11:40. We're still not expecting
At this moment it
change.
is, and I've been emailing right as we speak, and I still have not gotten a response that there's any change. We still expect the president to come out shortly.
Ed, you're a couple of miles away, I think, if I understand correctly. So talk to us about what's going on there at the White House physically, the precautions that are being taken.
What we have noticed over the last hour or so, certainly a lot of law enforcement vehicles with sirens and whatnot heading from this direction over in that direction. But I have not seen, to kind of just keep the temperature down on this from this standpoint, I haven't seen the Secret Service adding in some more dramatic protections or something. I'm looking outside the northwest gates. It's relatively status quo here at the White House, but we've been seeing law enforcement vehicles moving throughout this city at a rapid pace over the last hour or so, presumably heading over there. Remember, this is only about 3.5 miles away from the White House to the Navy Yard, and the Navy Yard, for our viewers, is right near the Nationals baseball park. And in fact, we've been told that families who have either folks who are in the military from this facility or other office buildings nearby who are trying to reunite with their families, they're doing that in a parking lot over at Nationals Park. So to give you a sense of where it is, it's not very far from the White House at all, Greg.
All in close proximity. Again, we're continuing to watch this helicopter hover around the Navy Yard, where a shooting took place just about 3 hours ago. Greg, we got that initial report, 8:20 Eastern Time. Here we are 3 hours later. We're still working to find out more information about the shooter or shooters. And we want to caution you with the multiple shooters report. When we cover shootings often, right, Greg, there's often reports of a lot of chaos and multiple shooters. That was the case in Sandy Hook, for example. we hate to reference these other tough news stories, but this is what we have seen as we're continuing to gather the information about what exactly transpired this morning.
And law enforcement is always instructed, don't assume there is only one shooter. Once you have somebody contained who you believe to be the shooter, then you must look for other possible suspects. And so that's probably what they're doing now. Two officials say police are looking for the possibility of a second shooter at the Washington.
Apropos, because Jennifer Griffin is standing by with some breaking information on that. Jennifer?
Jenna, I just spoke to a Navy spokesman who says that they are working under the assumption that there are two shooters at this point in time down at the Navy Yard. We've heard reports that the SWAT team is entering a second building at the Navy Yard, but what we can say is that Navy officials now confirming that they believe two shooters were involved. I just spoke to Navy spokesman Ed Buckleton down at the Navy Yard, and again, that is a change from moments ago when I spoke to Navy officials, and they did not have any confirmation of that. Rod Wheeler has been reporting that at the local area hospitals, they've seen evidence of two different kinds of bullet casings being used, bullets being used in the wounds that they're treating. That's where they first got tipped off to the notion that there may be a second shooter. Now Navy officials pursuing that second shooter as we speak. We know that the first shooter is contained, barricaded into building 197 between the 3rd and 4th floor. We don't have details about where that second shooter may be at this point in time.
And Jennifer, do we have any information about whether or not this is a civilian, or whoever these people are, if they're civilians, if they are active duty military? Tell us a little bit about that, and also about the base, which seems to have both civilians and active duty military working on it on a daily basis.
Well, the only thing we can say is that the shooting took place on this 3rd floor of the NAVC command headquarters, where there are mostly civilians involved with the procurement and the design of the Navy's top ships, weapon systems, and submarines. So we know there were a number of civilians in there. There are 3,000 people who work in that section of the NAVC command. NAVC command has about a quarter of the Navy's overall budget. So this is a very central location on the Navy, at the Navy Yard. We know that Admiral Jonathan Greenert, the CNO, Chief of Naval Operations, was at home at the time of the shooting. He was safely removed from the base. He is now in a safe location. This is a very, this is the oldest Navy base in the country. This particular building, 197, is where all of the top secret designs for the Navy's, top destroyers, their submarines, that's where contractors work. That's where the civilians who engineer these Navy vessels, that's where they are located. We also know from sources earlier today, I spoke to Navy officials who said that the initial shots were fired at a security guard near the gate of the facility. We have a description of the one shooter who appears to be contained in building 197 at this moment, and that description came from eyewitnesses. He is a 6 foot tall, dark-skinned, bald man who was wearing a dark shirt and dark pants. No indication that he was military necessarily. The early description suggested that he was carrying an AR-15 rifle. That's a civilian version of the standard military service rifle, the M16. Initially at 8:20 a.m. we heard that 3 shots had been fired. That's interesting for those who are trying to figure out what kind of weapon was used, because an M16 would fire in 3-round bursts. However, the initial report suggested there was an AR-15 involved. Again, all of these details very fluid, but we can confirm there were fatalities. There are at least 12 people injured or killed in this incident. The numbers are fluid, and now we can confirm from Navy officials, from a Navy spokesman, that they are pursuing a second shooter. They believe there's a second shooter on the scene.
Yeah, and now confirmation from officials there that police are looking for the possibility of a second shooter at the Navy Yard, where several people have been killed. So 2 bits of information, a possible second shooter, and indeed the confirmation that several people have been killed. But Jennifer, this is a Navy Yard which is, not only does it design and help construct Navy ships, but it also, as I understand it, procures weapons. But are most of the people there Are they civilians attached to the Navy, or are they Navy regulars? How would you describe them?
I would say that in this particular building, this is where there are very senior level civilians, engineers, top level Navy procurement officers. This is where the most sophisticated Navy systems are bought, built, engineered. This is the heart of the Navy Yard. It is a very important building. It's a very important facility. The NAVSEA Command, which this building 197 is a part of, as I mentioned before, it has 1/4 of the Navy's overall budget. So it shows you how important this location is. It is not an operations center. It's not where there are Navy personnel directing operations, but it is the pulse of where the Navy, as it builds these ships, as it designs these state-of-the-art ships, it is where their top civilians are located.
Jennifer, stand by for a moment. We're going to continue to take that breaking news from the Pentagon. In the meantime, what you're seeing on your screen is a map of the area that we're talking about. Ed Henry just told us a little bit about where it was in relation to Capitol Hill and also to the White House. And as Greg pointed out, it's in a very tight area. Only a couple miles really separate the Capitol Hill from the area where the shooting took place. There's a close-up of the map so you can see it. We also have the live scene where Building 197 is at the Navy Yard that Jennifer Griffin was mentioning, and we have the camera trained on that. As you can see, the scene has died down just a little bit, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. We are still working to confirm amount of injured, amount of fatalities as well, and we're waiting on a press briefing from DC local law enforcement to hopefully bring us some more facts here about what actually transpired over the last 3 hours. Don Borelli is joining us. He's the Chief Operating Officer at the Safan Group. He's former Assistant Special Agent in charge in the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force. And Don, if you could, I know we are only really speculating at this point to know what's happening in those buildings that we're seeing on our screen. But what's the approach now? 3 hours after you get word a shooting happened, there have been fatalities, there have been injuries. What is happening in those buildings?
Well, right now you've got kind of two things going on. Number one, you want to gather tactical intelligence, and that's going to be the information that's going to help the SWAT teams be able to contain the situation. So they will be interviewing victims and witnesses to see was there one shooter, was there two, what were their descriptions, pulling videotape not only from in the building but from the surrounding areas. We saw in the Boston Marathon shooting that those video cameras that are in public domain can be of a great intelligence value. So they're going to be looking to see the approach that this person or persons made and how they actually got access to the building. They're going to want to know any information, if possible. Do either of these individuals, have they been in this building before? Do they have relatives there? Were they former employees? Anything that would give them some type of an advantage to be able to move tactically. With that, the SWAT teams that are in place are going to want to set up a perimeter and close in on that perimeter or perimeters, assuming that there's two shooters and possibly both in different locations, and close in as tight as possible to contain those people. And then from there, number one, ensure that there are no hostages, so evacuate anybody in harm's way. And then once that perimeter is set up, then law enforcement has the luxury of time. That's when you don't want any more fatalities or injuries, and the goal of this situation is going to be to negotiate a peaceful surrender so that there's no more bloodshed.
Don, it's Greg Jarrett. Look, if there are two shooters, that certainly changes the calculus as to what the motivation might be, as opposed to sort of a disgruntled, angry employee at the Washington Navy shipyards. But my goodness, I mean, this is a highly secured area. It's a very important venue. When you first heard this, what did you think?
When I first heard that it was a single shooter, my first thought is it's employee violence. Employee violence is the numbers are on the rise in this country, people that are disgruntled, especially if they have a beef with the government. So that was my first thought. Now, with as you said, confirmed second shooter, it changes the calculus a bit, but I would say it's way too early to jump to conclusions that this is some type of a terrorist type situation or whatever. I think, you know, that's where the investigation needs time to figure out what the motivations are. It's certainly a very dangerous situation in either case, and right now the priority is for the SWAT teams to just get that perimeter contained and make sure that there's no more innocent lives lost or people injured.
And that's a big question. The scene looks quiet now, Don, but that's all we can tell from appearances, and as we know, they can be deceiving. Don, if you would just stand by, I have a little bit more information from our Catherine Herridge. Law enforcement officials are telling Fox Now that there have been no reports of shots fired at the scene in the last half an hour. And so this is consistent with the also additional reports that we had that a suspect or a shooter is cornered, neutralized, contained, however you'd like to describe it. Either way, no one is in custody at this point. And that's one of the big things we're waiting and watching for. Feds are moving in. They're trying to clear this site, as Don was describing to us, moving it through different buildings and trying to figure out if everyone's clear. That process can take several hours. In the meantime, we know that 3,000 people worked at this Navy Yard, and many of them showed up to work like most of us did on a Monday.